I'm going to flush this coyote pelt here. It's been case skinned and I've just washed it in cold water. It's not necessary, but it's something I like to do before I flush it and dry. But I'm going to be using this flushing beam. Also going to be using a flushing knife right here. In order to do that, I'm going to turn this thing inside out and then put it on the flushing beam. So here you can see I've got the pelt on the beam. So I'm going to be flushing using a Necker knife. So this is just a basic flushing knife. This is model 600. So with a flushing knife, it's actually not a very sharp knife. You got this curved knife with two handles. This side is the dull side, and you're mostly going to use the dull side for doing your flushing. So this side up here has a little bit of sharpness to it, so it's used for doing some stubborn material, but most of your flushing is all going to be done with this curved dull side of the blade. I'm going to flush the body of the hide first. I'm going to flush from about the neck down and get all that off, and then I'm going to do the face after that. So I'm going to take the point of the flushing beam and push that against my body. I'm going to take the dull curved edge of the flushing knife and make sure it doesn't slip off. Got to hold it tight there. And then I'm going to start working that flush down. So here's a close-up of what's happening. You can see some of that flesh is being peeled off the rest of the pelt here, and you can see the clean flesh right here. So we're going to basically be doing this to the entire pelt. And here you can see the difference between the clean flesh part that's all nice and white. You can even see some of the, you can see the hair on the other side, and you can see how that membrane is peeling off. And we're going to be using the flushing knife to just push this membrane all the way down. We're going to do that to the entire hide. So as I do this, I'm holding the nose of the coyote pelt against my belly, and that's what's holding it in place on the flushing beam. And as I work this down, I'm going to pull the pelt up. And keep working it. You want to press hard enough to scrape the flesh, but you don't want to press too hard that you tear the hide. So it can take a little bit of getting used to find that right balance. Usually get a little fat building up in the blade, it's fine, just flick it off. So I'm going to turn this, I'm going to rotate this. Now as you flush it and you move it down, you also need to tilt it and rotate it so you go all the way around the pelt. So when you get to the shoulder or the arms here, or the front legs rather, it can be a little tricky. So you've got to flush over top of them and then bring them up and flush underneath of them. And this area is pretty thin, so you got to be careful that you don't tear the hide. Pull this up here on the beam and get underneath the front leg. This is especially thin here, so you got to be careful. It's very easy to tear. Once you get past the front legs and move past them and get all the way down past the front legs, it gets a little easier. And here we have a bullet hole here. You want to be careful when you get to any bullet holes or tears in the hide. Be careful when you flush around there. It's a lot easier to rip if you catch the edge of that. So it just requires a little more caution when you get to a hole. So I've gotten past the front legs and the bullet holes, so it's going to get a little easier from here on out. So right now I'm at the thickest part, it's getting this saddle off. If you got a close-up, you can see the clean white hide and all this flesh that I'm pulling off. If you don't get this off, it won't dry right and it won't tan soft. But I'm going to keep working it like this till I get it all the way off the hide. So once I get it down a ways, I need to rotate it on the fleshing beam. And I'm going to keep repeating this process till I get all the flesh off the hide. So when it's fleshed, it should look something like this. A nice creamy white color. Don't want to see any chunks of fat or meat on there. Now this pelt still has the nose cartilage in it, so I'm going to skin that out. Just going to very carefully use a sharp knife, peel that skin back and skin out this cartilage. So there you can see the nose is skinned out, all the cartilage is gone. Look at the other side, we got just nothing but a nose and no cartilage in there. But taking care of the ears can also be tricky. You need to do what they call turning the ears, which basically means turning this ear completely inside out. So if you look at the back side here, we have this big wad of cartilage and flesh here, and we've got to separate that from the skin and basically turn this ear inside out, just like you're taking a sock off a foot. You don't have to leave the cartilage in. So one thing you can do, you could completely skin this out and like remove all the cartilage and just have a skin flap of the ear. If you're doing something for taxidermy, you'd have to actually peel this whole thing out, and you want to keep that intact. So you really have a couple options, or you can do anything in between. But basically you got to get the back side of the ear separated from the cartilage here and turn it completely inside out. At that point you can cut out the cartilage and just have like the back ear flap, or you can actually leave it that way and tan it that way. So I'm going to start trimming the flesh on the inside of this, on the inside of the ear, and try and peel all that cartilage back and separate it from the skin. It's good to go slow when you do this, and you don't want a knife that's overly sharp. It helps to have something that's maybe got a little bit of a dull edge to it, so that way you don't cut too deeply. Very easy to mess up when you're doing this. So I've got the skin peeled back a little bit more, started to get the ear turned inside out. You can see the cartilage is pulled back from the skin there. Look on this side. I can actually start to get my fingers up in there between the back of the ear and the cartilage. And once you do that, you can actually start to work it with your fingers a little bit. And actually get up in there and actually start separating it a little bit with my fingers. You can see there we're starting to get the ear more inside out there. So here you can see I've got the ear mostly turned inside out. And that's what you call turning the ear. So you got this cartilage ball down here, which if you're going to keep that, if you want to keep the ear with its shape, you're going to want to get that flesh off there. But if you're preparing it for for fur sale or just to be a wall hanger, you don't have to keep that in there unless you want to. So if you want to, you could cut all of this out. It's kind of up to you. It's a little harder to dry if you leave it this way, but it's still doable. You can still actually tan it with the cartilage in there. So the reason you do that, if you want to have still have an ear shape, or if you want the ears to lay flat, you don't necessarily have to keep all this on here. I want the ears to lay flat when I display the pelt, so I'm going to just cut most of this off because it actually will dry easier. And although there'll be a hole, it won't be shown. It'll be covered by the ear. So there you go. I've cut that cartilage ball off. And again, if you want the ear to keep its shape and have the natural shape to it, or if you're doing taxidermy, you might want to leave that on there. But I cut it off because it dries faster. And if you look at the other side, you can't really tell that it's missing. You could, even if you want to, you can see where the cartilage is there against the ear. You could actually completely remove the cartilage from the ear and just have like the skin flap of the back ear and tan it that way. But it will tan perfectly fine with the cartilage in there. So I've gone ahead and removed most of the cartilage from the ear there, so you can see just the plain skin on the back there. Left a little bit there where the fur is still on there. And that'll still look normal, because when I dry it and tan it, I'll display it with the ears laid flat on the head. So how much you remove is up to you. If you get it out of there, it's going to dry a lot faster and help prevent the ears from slipping. But if you're going to display it with actually going to do taxidermy, or you want to somehow display it with the ears with their natural shape, you can certainly leave it in there. It's a little hard to get it dry, but as long as you get it dry fast and the hair doesn't slip, you can still tan it just fine with the ear cartilage in there. But this ear is completely turned inside out. And so that's what it looks like on the flesh side, turned inside out with most of the cartilage removed. And on the skin side, on the fur side, it looks pretty much still just like a normal ear. And so since I display it with the ears flat on the head, you won't really notice that hole in there. And it'll be easier to tan. So whether you leave the cartilage in there or not, if you don't turn the ears, you run a risk of hair slippage on the ears. The ears are a big place where you get a lot of slippage on a hide. And that's simply because if you don't turn them, they're very hard to dry. Even when they are turned, they take a lot longer to dry than the rest of the hide. So whether you leave the cartilage in or take it out, you want to make sure you get those ears turned and make sure they get completely dried. The last thing I have left to flesh is the face. That can be a little challenging. As I just take a knife, try and trim it off. You got to be careful doing that. I've never had much luck using the fleshing knife on the face, but some people do that. But you just want to carefully, and this can be very tedious, we want to carefully just remove all the flesh, get as much of the flesh and meat off the hide as you can. So sometimes you can take a knife and kind of scrape it. Make sure your knife isn't too sharp. This one's a little bit dull. Sometimes use a pair of scissors. You can take some, if you've got big chunks of meat, just kind of carefully trim them like that. So again, being careful not to cut holes in it. Another technique I found for fleshing the face is to take a cordless drill and put a wire brush on it. That has a tendency to move a lot of flesh. Again, you got to be careful you don't take off too much and rip a hole, but it can get a lot of flesh off there quickly. So if you have any holes in your hide, you're going to need to sew those, like this one here. You might have a hole because you get messed up when you're skinning or messed up when you're fleshing. That happens. Or you might have a bullet hole to sew. But you're going to want to sew these up, especially if they're large holes. Little ones you can usually leave, but large holes you're going to want to sew up. When it comes to sewing, what I like to use is an upholstery needle and dental floss. I found that works best. There's an example of a sewn hole. Now after you finish fleshing your hide, next step is going to be to put it on a stretcher and dry it. You can use these metal stretchers, they work fine. I've used them before, but I prefer the wood ones. They're much nicer and give you a better shape. So that's what I'll be using. So here you can see what one looks like when it's stretched and dried on the stretcher. So the finished product is going to look something like this. It's important for the hide to dry quickly so you don't get any slippage with your hair. One thing you might want to do is actually put it on the stretcher inside out and let it dry like that for a while. especially if you're in a humid climate or a colder climate. Here in Arizona, I don't really need to do that. This is already starting to get pretty dry. The reason you do that is so you can get the inside dry, then you turn it right side out, put it back on there, and let it dry that way. I'm going to just be turning this back right side out, put it on the stretcher, because it's already starting to get pretty dry. If you're in a climate where it might take a little bit longer to dry, you definitely might want to put it on the stretcher inside out. Sometimes leave it that way overnight or for 24 hours and then turn it right side out before you put it back on the stretcher. However, when you do that, be careful that you don't let it completely dry out. Otherwise, it can be almost impossible to turn it right side out again if you do actually let it dry all the way. So you want to let it dry to a little bit and then turn it right side out, put it back on there. But because I do this in a warm and dry climate, I tend to be able to get away with just putting these initially on the stretcher right side out. Now that I've got this right side out, I'm going to put it on the stretcher. Now I've got the coyote pelt on the stretcher. I've got the nose here on the top. I'm going to pull it down. I just want to re-emphasize, you want to make sure you turn it right side out before it gets too stiff. This was actually starting to get a little bit stiff, so it was a little difficult to get on there. But I got it on there now. You want to make sure you got the belly kind of on one side and the back on the other side, and have it roughly centered on there. So stretching it properly will give it a good shape when it's dried. Alright, so now it's on the stretcher. I'm going to actually use the stretcher to stretch it. And with these wood stretchers, that's done on the bottom. So these particular stretchers, they stretch this direction, and you've got a red mark here. That's supposed to be for like a bobcat or a small coyote. And the black mark is supposed to be where you're supposed to stretch it for a large or full-size coyote. And this is a smaller coyote. As you can see, it didn't go all the way to the black mark. But once I got it stretched out as far as it would go, tighten that wing nut. Now you can see the fur has been stretched out. And I'm going to use push pins, pin the edge of the flanks out here on the other side of the stretcher. That's the benefit of a wooden stretcher. You don't have to leave the lower jaw attached when you skin these out, especially if you're preparing them for sale. A lot of times many people just cut them off and you just have a complete open hole there where the mouth is. But I left mine on, so since I did, I went ahead and pinned it up to the board so it would dry straight. But leaving the lower jaw on is entirely optional. This is what it looks like when you don't include the lower jaw and you cut the lower jaw off. This is a common way to put up furs. And I've left the ears kind of flopping here. I'm going to leave them that way until they dry. And then when they get a little bit more dry, I'll actually pin them up forward on the head. That's just the way I like to dry them. I think it looks nicer that way. But for now, I'll leave them unpinned until they dry a little bit more. These particular stretchers work with these optional tail and belly boards. And the way these boards work, they fit in that bottom slot down there. And they allow you to have a place to pin out the tail. And again, that's something that's entirely optional. But it does make the fur look a lot nicer when it's dried and stretched that way. So here I've installed the tail board with the wing nut there. I've turned it around and now I'll stretch the tail and pin it to this board. So here we have the whole fur on the stretcher with everything pinned. And I'll leave it that way until it's dry. There's the other side. So here's the fur on the stretcher that's already dried. This has been on here for over a week. So you can see here I've pinned the ears forward and they've pretty much dried in that position. Take the pin out, they stay like that. And you don't have to do that, but that's just the way I like to present them. So here's the finished product. This is a fully dried and stretched fur. You can see it's still a little bit flexible, but it kind of crinkles like cardboard. Bend this will stay preserved like this for a long time. It's just important when you store it to make sure bugs don't get to it. So like moths and stuff will eat the hair, but you can store it like this for a long time and it won't rot. This is the condition you would sell it in if you're going to sell it for the fur market, or if you're going to tan it, you would later rehydrate it and tan it. If you're not going to do anything with it for a long time, you have the option to wrap it up in plastic and put it in the freezer, and that will keep bugs from getting to it. But if you're not going to put it in the freezer, make sure you store it somewhere where it's safe from bugs. Particularly make sure that it's not like laying up against the wall or have multiple furs pressed up against each other, because that's where clothing moths like to hide. So here's another coyote I just finished. So here you can see I'm using that tail board, and I've got the back legs and the flanks stretched around here. And I'm using that tail board to pin out the tail. Here you can see how I've got the stretch mark almost to the black mark, and that's where it's supposed to be to get the proper stretch for a full-size coyote. And here's a gray fox that I just put up. So this is a fox stretcher. You can see it's a little smaller than the coyote. So gray fox can be a little tricky because their skin is very thin, so you got to be careful. And you definitely want to make sure you get them turned right side out before they dry up. Otherwise, they become very difficult to turn right side out. And that's because their necks are very skinny and the necks tend to shrink up. So you can see how I did the tail with the fox stretcher here. I used this board here, pinned the board to the stretcher, and then pinned out the tail. There on the back side, you can see it's got a black mark on there. Stretch it too, so you get the right shape for the fox. The fox I did with the feet attached. So that presents a little challenge when drying. The feet can slip really easy, especially if they don't dry out. They have a tendency to hold moisture a lot longer than the rest of the pelt. Once these dry out a little bit more, I'll actually pin them out so they dry straight. The same with the ears. I'll let them dry a little bit more, and then I'll pin them forward on the head so they dry that way. If they don't air dry quick enough, one option you have is you can actually put a fan on them and blow a fan on them for a while. Dries them a little bit faster. After letting them dry a little bit, I pinned these front legs flat so they would finish drying in this position. So this is how I store my dried furs. I'll leave them like this until I'm ready to tan them. If I'm not going to get to them for a while, I'll wrap them up in plastic and store them in the freezer. That'll help protect them from bugs. So that's how I flesh and dry furs. Everything you saw in this video I'm going to be tanning later. If you're interested in that, you can check out my video on how I tan furs.